Is everybody familiar with the zytotechnology and how it works? Okay. Okay, this is, the limbic arc is built on the same foundation. So what I want to talk about today is this concept that we use in our zytotechnology, and we've got, we call it the triangle of health, or the triad of health. We have energetic, emotional, and functional. And health is really a balance between all of these areas, and all of those areas affect everything else. Sometimes in clinical practice and in real life, you women will relate to this, men seem to have a hard time realizing that they have emotions. True? Yeah. And it's because most guys don't process things emotionally. They process them in other ways, and so we just tend to be out of touch with emotions. And I think part of it too is cultural, where we're trained, oh, don't cry, be a man, all that kind of stuff, right? So, but it turns out that you can have a functional problem. For example, you can have a problem with your lung, and it will actually create an emotional imbalance. Now, the emotion that's associated with the lung is grief. So I'll tell you a quick story. I was in Seattle a few years back teaching a seminar. One of the women who was in the class had a intermittent, unproductive cough. It was that kind of a cough, where it wasn't really doing her any good, but she was still coughing. And we got to the point in this seminar where I was demonstrating EVOX, and I said, who would like to do an EVOX session? And I told them a little bit about it. She raised her hand. I said, great, come on up. She decided she wanted to do, well, in the course of the conversation, it turns out that her mother had died about a year earlier, and she was still grieving from her mother's death. And so she did a reframe on her mother, and when she finished the reframe, she basically just had this huge emotional relief of grief, and her cough stopped. It was a 2-day seminar, and she didn't cough the rest of the 2 days. And the problem was she had the grief that was impacting the lung, and that was just a classic example of how that happens. But energetically, we also get impacted. And here's the way this happens, because people will look and say, wait a minute, the lung, you mean grief relates to the lung? That just doesn't make any sense. It's kind of a stupid idea. It's actually traditional Chinese medicine, and I'm sure that the guys or the men and women who came up with that concept just observed it over hundreds of years and realized that people who have lung problems tend to have problems with grief, and vice versa. There's actually a biochemical reason why it happens. You have these molecules that get organized as peptides, and then peptides get organized as amino acids, which are a little bit more complex. And it's this organization that then creates emotion. And different organizations will have affinities to different parts of the body. So you have some amino acids that actually, and peptides that actually will impact your liver. And if those impact your liver, they actually are the ones that also create anger. So anger is the emotion that's associated with the liver for that reason. It's not just because of some esoteric reason. There's actually a biochemical reason why these things correlate. Now, the way energetic falls into this is it's energy that tells the molecules here how to organize to become a peptide. So, an example of this would be You have an expectation. No, let me back up. I'm just trying to think about a real life example that we can all relate to. Have you ever been offended? Have you ever had somebody do something that disappointed you or offended you? We all have, haven't we? So let's say your friend did something and it hurt you. And for a week you went around and you brooded on it and you thought about it and you rolled it through your mind 100,000 times. And then finally you just went to your friend and said, you know, you did that and I'm really hurt. And your friend said, oh my gosh, really? And then they say, well, I didn't mean to do that. This is what happened. And all of a sudden you go 180 degrees and you go, oh my gosh, it's okay. Has anybody had that experience? Yeah, okay. Well, what it is energetically we have an expectation. And then something happens and we don't get the expectation met, so it creates this energetic dissonance, and the energy pattern that comes out of this disappointment tells these peptides or these things to organize in a certain configuration, and bingo, now we have this triad impacted, and the minute this energetic pattern changes, the sequence changes, and our whole life changes. Now, this is the end game for a lot of what we do as Zyto, but it's the end game for Limbic Arc. Let me erase the board, at least part of the board here, and let's go back a little bit further. The way that the Limbic Arc works is we tap into quantum fields. And in fact, the way Zyto works is we tap into quantum fields too. But, so Crystal, come and stand here if you would, please. And Johnny, would you come up here too, please? Okay, so stand right here, Johnny, if you would. Okay, now, where does Johnny end? And where, does she end right here? Does she end right here? Or does she end out here? Further out. Yeah, she actually, this is kind of where we think she ends, because that's kind of the density of mass that we perceive easily. But do any of you guys see auras? Mm-hmm. You do? Mm-hmm. Okay, so Johnny sees auras, so when she looks at somebody, she might see this out here, and she'll see it in different colors. And different colors will tell you kind of how that person feels or what they're thinking, because the aura, aura changes. So Johnny doesn't stop here, she goes here. Now what about Crystal? Same thing. So when they're standing in proximity, are they merged? The answer is yeah, they are merged. Now, if Johnny comes over here and Crystal stays there, do you think they're still connected? And what about over here? Are they still connected? Yeah, you can sit down now, both of you, thanks. The answer is yes. There's no place that Crystal can go where she will not be connected to Johnny. It's because everybody has it's called a field. So a field is a sphere of influence. And not only everybody has a field, everything has a field. This marker has a sphere of influence, and that's called its field. And all those fields, so here we are, and you know, we have our fields that go infinitely into space and time, and we all live in a place where all fields merge, and that's called the 0-point field. Now the reason it's called the 0-point field is because if you sum all of the fields that exist there, they sum to 0. The reason is because of this concept. You guys are familiar with that? The yin-yang symbol? Okay. For every yang, there's a yin. So everything has an opposite in some way. Everything is opposed in some way by something else. That means for every up there's a down, and every in there's an out, et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't mean that in the case of me, there's this other fields out there trying to get me. It's not a paranoid kind of relationship. It's more of a symbiotic relationship. Because what happens is all of these fields that intersect, they contain each other. So one of the reasons why you are who you are is because of all the other fields that surround you through time and space that oppose you or constrain you and keep you into your present form and state of whatever you're in. Now, if Janice is in this field, along with Crystal, and let's draw Johnny over here, and let's put Gustavo out here too. All of you guys are balancing each other in some way. Okay? Yeah, you got it. What happens if Janice shifts her energetic posture? What if her field changes?
She faints.
That can happen. And okay, so when Janice changes, when her field shifts, what has to happen in the 0-point field? Everything else has to compensate for it. Okay? So a classic example is when I was growing up, I observed that when my mom was mad, life at home was miserable. Yeah. And more than anybody else. I mean, my brothers or my sisters could be mad, and it was like, no big deal. But when mom was mad, it was just not fun. And even my dad, if my dad was mad, it was like, no big deal. That's because my mom's field was so significant at home. And so when her field shifted, the rest of us compensated in ways that we just didn't have to compensate for anybody else because their fields weren't that strong. So what happens then is, because everything has a field, if the field of the United States of America shifts, and it has a field, even though it's an inanimate concept, it has a field. And if that field shifts, then everything else in the 0-point field shifts to accommodate it. And that's, you know, you've heard the saying, if you want to change the world, change yourself. That's literally true. That's the only way you can really change the world. And if you do change yourself, you do literally change the world. You change the whole universe, in fact. Now, what happens then is we take this reality and we create fields. So Michelle gets a remedy from somewhere, and she goes through a process with the elite, and it creates a pattern, a computer signature that's comprised of ones and zeros, and she links the signal generated by this to this sample, and what that does is it loads information into the 0-point field. So she creates a new field, and once it's in the 0-point field, then it's available to everybody, everywhere, every when, because we all are everywhere, every when. We're all there. So what happens then with the limbic arc is we've created a library, just like we have in the Zyto products, but we've created a library of products. And we've created then an account. So if you subscribe to Limbic Arc, first thing you do is you come in and you create an account. And when you create the account, we then take that specific information that you've given us and we link the app to your field. So this is all done through a quantum process called entanglement. So I can go into my Limbic Arc account and I can, the app in this case, and I can manipulate the things that I want active in my field, and it will have an impact directly on my field. So we have an info, we call these info boosts. So spelled info boost. Because what we're doing is we're not introducing chemistry, we're not introducing medicine. All we're doing is exposing you at a field level. It's a field effect. We're exposing you to information that exists in the 0-point field. When that happens, your body has the ability to do something with it. Just like when we had our drawing over here, you know, your expectation creates an energetic, creates a peptide, creates an amino acid, creates all of these things. Well, you can, back here, at a more subtle level, that's where information gets processed. So you can take information at a totally subconscious level and create a physiological effect because it's a cascade. It just flows downstream. And that's what limbic arc does. So you can do all kinds of amazing things with this, like we have an immune boost. You can actually, I believe, enhance your immune system by turning on that info boost appropriately. If you want to focus your mental capacity, you can turn on the focus info boost. If you want to be a sexier woman, you turn on the hers. If you want to be a sexier guy, yeah, you can turn that on if you want. Yeah. We have one called his. You know, so there's different info boosts, and they're made up of just different pieces of information that have been linked to products that have a known benefit. That's the way it works. So we say, okay, here's the information of ginkgo biloba. Well, ginkgo biloba, if you take it chemically, it'll have an impact on your circulation to your brain, so it helps your memory. We can give you the information or the info boost for ginkgo biloba, and it will create a downstream cascade with the expectation that it will improve memory without actually taking the ginkgo biloba. Let's go in and I hit the plus button, and here are some pre-built info boosts. So there's one called inflammation, calm, and I can scroll through. There's my custom ones. Here are, you know, focus, energy, sleep. So let's say I'm having a hard time sleeping. I click on that sleep info boost. There we go. And it brings it up for me. And if I scroll down, then I have a place where I can set certain parameters, like how many days do I want it to run. I'm going to get some notifications. How often do I want to get those? And if I want to add more ingredients, there's a button at the bottom I can push. And I can then go ahead and add or subtract anything in the library. But the sleep info boost is built with a combination of products that we know has a positive impact on sleep. So if you don't know how to manipulate those products, you'll just go in and you'll just select it and turn it on, and your body gets the information. And your body actually has the ability to filter out the information that might not apply to you and accept the information that's specific to you. The tighter you get that, actually, the better it works, however. Then at the top on the right side, I just hit activate, and there it goes. And you can see from the eye candy that it's now working. You know, the challenge that we have with our technology isn't that it's unscientific. It's that we draw on so many disparate disciplines that it appears to be unscientific. So you'll get an electrical engineer come in and they'll say, how does this thing work? And you explain it to them and they'll say, you're nuts. It can't work. If you get a biologist and you explain it to them, they'll say, you're nuts. Get a physicist, you're nuts. But if you put all the pieces together, it's like, no, this makes perfect sense. I mean, it's not like we're just making this stuff up. And it's validated by the experience of the people who use it. So It works better for some people than others, admittedly, but it works. So that's all.